All right, the next question we have, based again on the concept that these children have some intellectual ability, understanding ability that's inconsistent with their age, advanced for their age, accelerated. How do gifted children internalize abstract concepts like faith, God, and afterlife? Is their understanding and internalizing these concepts different from other children because they have an advanced or accelerated understanding?
You wanna? I hate to be the one speaking out. I don't wanna be obstructive.
You see, my answer to that is always the same. I mean, I believe that, and obviously I've got a theistic base, but I believe that you have that there's a psychological developmental process, and that at certain stages, all children tend to be more concrete. At certain stages, they tend to be more magical in their thinking. And so it's very difficult to answer. That question. It depends on the age of your child and who they are and what their giftedness is. I will say, I mean, and I think it is very difficult for your child at a young age, below being a teenager, it's very confusing to take them from one tradition to another tradition to another tradition. I think that whether you're going to train your child in humanism, or whether you're going to train to have Judaism or Christianity or Islam, I think that to start somewhere with your child and then help them to be able to look beyond that, but you start somewhere, and because most children at an earlier age, this is the trouble with this fourth grader, her quote. I mean, they're not ready to deal with nihilism. A lot of the writing and novels and all, it's nihilistic. Well, it's one thing for you and I to read that. Life has no meaning, we're all destined, there's no meaning to it. It's another thing for a child who's in fourth grade who developmentally is not ready. That's like, saying, well, my children can go out and they can have a sexual experience if they want to when they're 6 years old. There's no problem with that. Or my 12-year-old can have a sexual experience. They're not ready to deal with that developmentally. And as I said, the theist would say God has planted the psychological processes within us that cause us to conceive that there's something higher, something more, that we try to make meaning out of things. Even if we're atheistic, what is the meaning? How do we fit in with the cosmos? I mean, I think that is part of our makeup. And while the theist would say God has planted eternity in our hearts, and an atheist or an evolutionist would just simply say, well, that's just part of the developmental process. But I just don't think that you can. I think that if you try to expose your child to things that they're not ready for, I wouldn't want my fourth grader to read Sartre, even a simplified version, any more than I would want them to read some novel that had a lot of sex or violence in it, because they're just not ready to handle it. And so I think it's very important to give your child a start in some tradition. In a tradition, though, don't pick something that you aren't comfortable with. There's something that you're not comfortable with, but start them out somewhere where they see people thinking about spiritual things, asking spiritual questions, and they get a basic framework, and then you can react against that. You were indoctrinated as a fundamentalist Baptist, and so, okay, I know that's not what I want. That's not what I believe. But give them some hooks to hang these things on. Just to say I'm going to expose them every week to something different is not going to help them. It's too much to sort out. You go to a different religion every week and you try to sort it out as an adult. You'll find that very difficult to do, because you can't from one week to another. You come here and you hear me teach, Jesus Christ is the only way to God. And then you go to the synagogue and you hear something different. You go, it's very confusing. And I wouldn't, any more than you would, I would try to help your child have some basic hooks to hang things on while teaching them, even in whatever tradition, well, the imam or the pastor or the rabbi may say that's the only way, but there are a lot of people that believe there are other ways, and I want you to be open to examining those, or whatever. But I think you owe it to your child, just as you take them to school, just as you make sure they're not exposed sexually to things they're not ready for, or other things, that you give them some basic hooks. And it can be humanism. I'm not saying you have to go to a church or a synagogue or a mosque, but give them some basic hooks. You should have developed something by this point in your life, and if you haven't, you need to. And then help them have those hooks, teaching them that, no, this may not be the only way. I may not be right in the things that I believe, but this is why I believe what I believe, and I think you give them a start and the freedom then to examine other things, so that you're not thrown out of the family if you don't remain a Christian, or if you don't remain a Jew, or if you don't do this, or if you don't remain an atheist, we're not going to accept you. And that's what happens to a lot of children. They're not given the freedom to explore. But the other side of that is some children are never given any hooks, and they really have never been exposed to any faith system enough to really understand what does that mean.
Let me ask the question.
Yes, of course.
You touched on something I was really hoping to touch on, is the tradition aspect. So a challenge that a lot of us deal with is the tradition piece. So, some of these kids are really smart. They actually challenge that tradition. So in that setting, typically you have two options to deal with. I told you, so do it, this is the right way to do it. It's religion. There are certain boundaries. Or you try to...
I would say that was very bad.
Yeah, or you have to...
No matter what your religion. I think that's bad parenting.
Kind of say, yes, we understand it's tradition, but now you have to modify to what makes sense to the child. And that's the dichotomy there, because you want to follow the tradition, but at the same time you have these kids asking these questions. So how would you think? What do you think is a good approach in those situations?
I think exactly what, I mean, you have a tradition, you have a belief that you have, whatever that belief is. And you share that with your child. That may be ethnically based, and you say, well, we grew up in this country with this background, and this is what we've been taught. But there are many other people that believe different things. You certainly can read about this religion, or about humanism, or about atheism, and they will at the right time. They will. It's kind of your moment, the moment when all the kids that are drugged to church, or drugged to synagogue, drugged to things, it has no effect on them. But if it's something that they're interested in, if you engage them in a way that's meaningful to them, and that's where I think you have some responsibility to help them find some hooks, but give them the freedom. And that's what most religions don't do. There's not the freedom. I think one of the advantages of growing up in a mixed tradition is that the freedom almost has to be there. And that's an advantage, because it's not just one way. And so you realize, well, Mama's family believes this way, and Daddy's family believes this way, and we want you to understand both ways, but then you have to pick your way. And that's okay. And we'll still love you, and we'll still accept you, and you'll still be part of the family. And that's hard for any of the mainline religion, of the world. It's hard for any of them to do that, because it's locked up in our history, our tradition, our nationalism. And I think we're hopefully at a point where we can start breaking free of some of that.
I want to respond to that with two different stories. One is of my husband, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind if I shared his story. He's a Unitarian Universalist minister as well, and the way that he came to Unitarian Universalism actually started when he was in Sunday school as a very young child. And this honestly could have happened in any religious institution. He grew very exasperated by the stories that he was learning in his Sunday school, because there didn't seem to be the right answers, the ones that he was looking for. And so he kept asking more and more questions. And his religious education teacher finally got frustrated with him and said, go to the service. Go sit in the service. I can't do anything more for you here. And then he went up to the religious leader in the institution after a service and said, you said this, this, and this. I don't understand that. I don't believe that. Why is it that way? And the religious leader said, why aren't you in Sunday school? And so rather than providing him with the space to ask these very difficult questions, they kept passing him back and forth, and they showed him that he didn't have a home there. It took him a long, long time to come back to a faith tradition and to feel that he could actually have a home, where he could ask questions, but also still be within a tradition that felt right to him. My story growing up is that when I was in high school, I started very vehemently questioning whether religion was a good thing at all. I was looking at the history of religion in the world and got very angry. I think a lot of teenagers go through this stage. And I said, well, I never ever want to be a part of a church or a faith tradition at all, because all we're doing is ruining the world. And what I didn't notice, though, was that I was going to youth group during this time. I was going to my Unitarian Universalist youth group. I just didn't see it through that lens of being a part of a religious tradition. It took me many years to look back on that and say, well, I was a part of a religious tradition, and I was a part of one that has a lot of meaning for me. While I was doing that questioning, and I was allowed to be there anyway, and I was told that I had a home, and I could share these feelings, but also still felt like this was my community that I could come home to again and again, and ask these questions of people that would welcome me anyway. And I think that's true for families as well. You're creating this container where your children can ask these difficult questions, but also know they're going to be loved.